Okay, I don't see anyone else in a waiting room at the moment. Let's give another 20 seconds and we can start.
Yes, welcome and thank you for joining our workplace communication session. How are you this morning? Are you well? Can you hear me well? Can
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
good.
thank you for that.
Good, very good. Right, okay, so why we are here? Well, because working across borders or with individuals from diverse cultural backgrounds is a reality for most of us today. And addressing the complexities of cross-cultural communication directly influences everyday interactions in various professional settings, such as between team leaders, supervisors, quality controllers, project managers, and our colleagues at work. And especially colleagues from different cultural backgrounds may have unique beliefs, expectations, and norms, which can lead to misunderstandings. So it's really about this difference in how people communicate and what they expect from each other. And this difference makes it much easier to accidentally offend or even upset someone. And of course, those misunderstandings, I'm sure you can agree, can happen more frequently in diverse environments. This is because differences in communication styles, our expectations, and of course, cultural norms. So the problem is at the moment that many organizations miss out on significant opportunities due to the lack of knowledge, skills, or the inspiration to communicate effectively in multicultural and multilingual environments. And this is actually where we come in. My name is Ivona, and together with my team at PAB, we specialize in cross-cultural communication strategies. And we have three divisions: PAB Languages Center, where we tackle the issue of language barriers in high-risk content. This is technical, legal, or medical content. Next division is PAB Magnet, where we address the complexities of cross-cultural mix in the workplace. So we work with a wide range of organizations locally and nationwide, including supply chain, logistics, food produce, and food manufacturing clients, really helping them to develop and empower their diverse teams. And the third division, PAB Semaphore, is assisting exporting businesses. So we are trusted by private sector and public sector organizations from across the East Midlands and beyond. We became a trusted partner to deliver workshops, webinars, talks, and recently pre-recorded video training. And everything is all about helping organizations reach out to international markets and communicate effectively across different cultures. So what I'm trying to say is you are in good hands. Right, so what is the plan for today? Well, we will begin the session by discussing common misunderstandings that can arise in workplaces with cultural diversity. After that, Nigel Garner will take over to discuss differences between high context and low context cultures, really explaining how those distinctions impact communication with diverse teams. And he will present some strategies tailored to really bridge that gap between different communication styles in the context of high and low cultures. And then after Nigel's part, I will be also discussing how to apply inclusive language practices. So I am excited to have you all with us at the workplace communication session today. For those who join a little bit later, welcome once again. I would love for everyone to actively participate. So a quick question to start with: would you be open to some active participation using the chat box or unmuting yourself and maybe sharing your thoughts and ideas during the session? Would you be happy to do that?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
So yes, we also have an answer on the chat saying yes, they will be happy to participate and use chat box or unmute themselves.
Great. Very good. Right, well, before we go any further, what I want to highlight is that I'm not a fan of generalization or drawing conclusions on the basis of generalization. And there are, of course, subcultures within each national culture that have their own distinct values and beliefs, and everyone is an individual. So stereotypes can be misleading, let alone unfair and counterproductive. But actually, when we look at people, think about it. When we look at people or when we hear people, we often have those immediate thoughts or feelings about them based on their race, accent, or ethnicity. And we all do that. It's unconscious or conscious, but we all have those immediate thoughts or feelings. And so when we explore cultural differences, we need to be mindful of that, because it isn't just about awareness or the assumptions we make. It's about learning how to interact effectively with people from all over the world in different environments. Because at the end of the day, we really want to understand what people are saying. We genuinely want to understand what they mean, what they genuinely mean. But it's not easy. We are all so different, and everyone is going to speak differently and behave differently. So it's about awareness, but also understanding. And understanding that there is no absolute when it comes to behaviors. We don't all behave the same way. We are influenced by friends, family, our experiences, our life events, even our health or our status. We are influenced by our emotions and how we manage them, even our age. So all these things come to play, and more, we shift and change. So what I'm saying, we can't put people in a box because things change, people change, things change. At the same time, I do believe in preparation and having that good knowledge about my customers, my colleagues, or business partners, because this will help us understand ourselves and the people around us. So preparation is important, and generalization is a good starting point. So now let's explore some examples of how misunderstandings can occur. Okay, let's start with feedback in multicultural settings. So why is feedback important and problematic? Well, feedback in the workplace is essential for personal and professional development. And in different cultures, the manner of giving and receiving feedback varies significantly. High context cultures might prefer indirect feedback, while low context cultures often value direct and straightforward feedback. And of course, Nigel will discuss this in more detail later during the session. But let's look at some case studies. So the first one, in a factory with a mix of Asian and Western workers, a manager from Latvia, a low context culture, gives blunt, direct feedback in front of the team to an Asian worker from a high context culture. And the Asian worker feels embarrassed and disrespected, which might lead to reduced morale and productivity. Another case study. During a project review, an Italian project manager provides gentle, suggestive feedback to German team members, expecting them to read between the lines. The team members from Germany, used to direct communication, miss the request for improvements, which might lead to ongoing performance issues. Let's look at health and safety. So health and safety in multinational settings. Of course, health and safety protocols are critical in any workplace, but interpretations and attitudes towards those regulations, policies, protocols can vary by culture. You might be asking, how is it possible? It's written black and white, but actually some cultures may have this tendency to strictly follow rules, while others rely more on personal opinions, personal judgments, or more informal practices. So let's look at another case study. In a multinational manufacturing plant, a project manager from Sweden enforces strict safety drills, which are resisted by South African team members who perceive those measures are as unnecessary and leading to compliance issues and resentment. Workers accustomed to informal safety measures bypass safety protocol, which are seen as simply too much by their experience and standards. And this, of course, leads to a minor accident, resulting in tensions between workers from different backgrounds who have varying commitments to safety standards. And a final example, this is related to time. the way we perceive time and project deadlines in multicultural teams. Because again, attitudes towards time vary culturally. Some cultures view punctuality as essential. And we can also say that there are fluid time and time-oriented cultures. So different cultures will not only view, but also use time in various ways. So in some cultures, being on time is very important, and those are time-oriented cultures. Punctuality is critical. Schedules are set, agendas are fixed, and business meetings are rarely interrupted. In those cultures, being late is considered disrespectful. And good examples of those time-oriented or time-rigid cultures will be Scandinavian countries, Germany, Japan, Russia. United Kingdom or British culture, Poland, Latvia, those cultures are not so rigid when it comes to time, but are leading more towards time-oriented cultures rather than the fluid time cultures. And people from fluid time cultures, on the other hand, pay less emphasis on strict punctuality. So people from fluid time cultures, they tend to value loose scheduling. Great examples of those cultures will be some Arab countries, Spain, France, Italy. And it means that in business relationship, in general terms, of course, generalization is a good starting point, although not always ideal. They value flexible approach to deadlines and meeting agendas. So let's look at what this could mean in practice. Well, a German factory supervisor expects punctual starts to shifts at 8 a.m. sharp. However, his Spanish coworker, who view time more fluidly, often arrives several minutes late. This might be perceived as laziness or some lack of respect, and it's simply a misunderstood cultural differences perception. Another case study where a British project manager sets a tight deadline for a software release, expecting all team members to prioritize this over other tasks. But her Indian developers, however, are accustomed to a more flexible schedules, leading to missed milestones and frustration on both sides. So I presented just a few, maybe extreme examples, but do any of the examples we shared resonate with you? So please feel free to unmute yourself. We're just interested to see whether you can relate to any of this, any of the examples I've shared. Or can you think of any other examples of miscommunication in the workplace? You can use the chat box or feel free to unmute yourself. Can you think of any examples?
I think I shared this example at the session we did the other month, but I had an example where I had some very key deadlines with one of our suppliers, and but they were from a different background, where they worked a lot more flexibly and more that, you know, nothing. If I was to ask for something, it was like, yeah, sure, we can sort that. That's fine. But I was obviously being quite low context, quite explicit, to say I need things done by these dates, and deadlines were missed, and there was frustration. And, you know, for me, it was like I thought I was clear, but they were working in a, you know, in a different way, like in the examples here. And, you know, it made me think that I needed to be a little bit, perhaps a bit more clearer in terms of, you know, and understanding, you know, the other ways of working, really.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for sharing that. Yes, it really leads us to this lesson, or, you know, how can we overcome those challenges, because there are difficulties in communicating across cultures, actually using the same language. So perhaps establishing more frequent project checks in, or monitoring progress of the projects more carefully without assumptions.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a really good idea. And you know, when I started with a different supplier, it was, yeah, at the beginning it was trying to understand the ways of working and how they worked and how I worked, So I could almost adapt my approach so that I could be a little clearer, but also understand in terms of their way of working. And even if it was a case of, you know, afterwards, I would send an email saying, "Hi, thanks for the meeting. So just to clarify, these are the things that we discussed. These are the things I need." So it meant that it was a little clearer for them and pointed them in the right way.
Thank you for sharing. Because one thing that is certain is that we will get misunderstandings, and we will be misunderstood, and we will miscommunicate with the best intentions. Cross-cultural communication will influence the way people are interpreting our messages as well. So it is about awareness and then how you navigate it. Is it managing or adjusting the timelines? Is it adjusting or extending the deadlines with our customers, knowing what might actually happen in the supply chain? So it's making sure we are not assuming, we are monitoring progress, and we are almost 2-3 steps ahead. And another thing which we keep repeating, as much as it can feel like over communicating too much, or even micromanaging, the rule is better to over communicate than leave gaps for people to interpret and make their own judgments and assumptions there. Thank you very much for sharing. Do we have any other comments anyone else can relate from your experience of managing projects or managing tight deadlines?
Nothing in the chat box.
Anyone would like to unmute
Yes,
yourself?
maybe I can mention, I think the perception of time. I think it's quite often where the misunderstandings can happen. And I'm talking here about work relationships and friends relationships. So I'm quite a person who is always on time or before the time. But I have friends from different cultures, and I know they will be late because they have always been late. So I think it's a matter of, as Chris mentioned, of knowing that person and adapting to that person, and maybe understanding that their perception of time is different than ours. So this is where we can maybe minimize the conflicts a little bit.
Sorry, Ivana, you're
Absolutely.
muted.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Monica. Thank you for sharing this. Right. Okay, so like we just said, the question is, why is there difficulty communicating across cultures in the same language? And actually, better question is, how can you overcome those challenges? Because communication is the key way. There is no escape here. We have to communicate effectively to collaborate and build trust with teams, with business partners and customers. And of course, cross-cultural communication skills are becoming much more important. But it's not easy. As we said, communication is not only words. It's a lot more than that. Communication is also about connection, those small but important details of how to connect with each other. So we started with awareness, and we already learned about the problem and where to expect misunderstandings. So the time perception, but also feedback, the way we provide and receive feedback, the health and safety approach in general terms, our attitude towards authorities and rules and protocols, how we follow them. So we have a good awareness now about those challenges, and the time is to look deeper at those differences. So let's look how we can tailor our interactions to meet the expectations of diverse teams. And this is when I will be handing over to Nigel. Yes, welcome, and thank you for joining our workplace communication session. How are you this morning? Are you well? Can you hear me well? Can
Yes,
yeah,
good.
Thank you,
good, very good. Right, okay, so why we are here? Well, because working across borders or with individuals from diverse cultural backgrounds is a reality for most of us today. And addressing the complexities of cross-cultural communication directly influences everyday interactions in various professional settings, such as between team leaders, supervisors, quality controllers, project managers, and our colleagues at work. And especially colleagues from different cultural backgrounds may have unique beliefs, expectations, and norms, which can lead to misunderstandings. So it's really about this difference in how people communicate and what they expect from each other. And this difference makes it much easier to accidentally offend or even upset someone. And of course, those misunderstandings, I'm sure you can agree, can happen more frequently in diverse environments. This is because differences in communication styles, our expectations, and of course, cultural norms. So the problem is at the moment that many organizations miss out on significant opportunities due to the lack of knowledge, skills, or the inspiration to communicate effectively in multicultural and multilingual environments. And this is actually where we come in.
Here we go. Okay, so what we're going to aim to cover here is what are high context and low context cultures. I know Ivona talked about that very briefly, but we'll go and deep dive into it a little bit more to give you some understanding of the differences in understanding that can occur in business, and also why it's important to understand and consider these in your communication approaches. And also why you need to consider different communication approaches depending upon the culture makeup of your team. And that could be gender, it could be ethnic background, it could be anything. And we'll cover off some examples of high versus low context issues affecting your team in the real world. Okay, things to actively consider when communicating across different culture types as well. So remain open to different styles, learn their values and their behavior. And as we were talking about, I think Chris and Ivona specifically, was check for understanding. And actually, it's not just say, do you understand? And there's a nod. You know, the techniques that we'll go on to a little bit later will actually help a communication, a conversation that elicits much more deeper checkpoints in terms of the understanding about an issue or a problem. Okay, so just a quick poll out to you, the audience. It is really about communication techniques. So how do you normally communicate with your teams? So if you can unmute yourselves and just tell me, you know, in briefly, if you have to impart some information or ask for information from your teams or from colleagues, how do you go about doing it? Anyone?
I'll start. Okay, I'll go ahead. Normally for our team, for example, we rely a lot in our chat boxes or teams, let's say. Either we communicate privately using chat privately. However, I always encourage going for a phone call like we are doing now. Just call on Teams and discuss it verbally, that rather than written, as much as possible. Just because I don't want to give any, just to save time and just to make sure that the message was clearly passed without sending so many messages.
Okay, and so why do you feel that you need to move away from chat, a text-based piece of communication? What's made you feel that you would need to do something more like this?
The straightforward answer would be saving time. That's number one. Rather than type in and wait for the message to come to you, then type to respond. So communication is always good when it is like this, running fluidly and smoothly.
Do you mean, sorry to interrupt you, do you mean because of the delay in response, or do you mean because you then have to go back and send another email or another chat to clarify what you meant in the first place?
Yeah, it could be that as well, because if that person needs clarification, so the clarification will go straight from me verbally rather than waiting for an email or for a text to come back to me.
Excellent. Sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to say something else as well.
No, that's fine so far.
All right. Okay. Anyone else? Chris, Michelle, Joe, Monica?
You know, for me, it would be email, it would be Teams chat, it would be meetings on Zoom or Teams, but unlike Ayman, I would prefer to chat on Teams. Maybe for me, it's just quicker for me. But yeah, maybe I'm a little, different than Ayman in terms of communication.
Yeah, Nigel, I would add something just to clarify the view for everyone. Because me and Monica, we have different roles. For example, reaching out to one of my colleagues, I need to share my screen and I need to go through explanation, etc. So that's why I find it this way more practical.
Chris, were you going to say something? I saw you.
Yeah, I was
briefly
just
unmute.
going to add on to that. The organisation I work for there's very much two. It's factory based, but obviously, I work in a more office, remote based environment. So the way that that I can communicate with other HR partners, other leaders, Teams, email, etc., very quick and send very direct messages. Whereas for factory colleagues, it's more about, they're on the floor, it's more huddles, it's more face-to-face communication, and that's kind of more important to them.
Yeah. Brilliant. Anyone else?
I find a face-to-face communication works best for me. And then if it's something that needs sort of setting in stone, then back it up with an email.
Yeah. So you've got proof, or you've got something to refer back to in terms of what you've said. Yeah,
yes, definitely.
That makes a lot of sense. So, so part of that, the question that I asked was leading on to this thing about clarity and making sure that what you're saying in whatever methods and channels that you're using, how you make sure that that works across different cultures or language backgrounds in the team. So I think what we've seen there is that some of the tendency is to use the fire and forget type of communication strategies, which means that you, the person that's sending that information, can get on with something else. But what we've seen is that sometimes that information, when it's received, it isn't actually as complete or with context that allows the recipient to actually do what they need to do about it. So what often is that you think is a fast approach can often be much more complicated and lengthy. Okay, so we'll miss this next bit, which is describing the challenge, because I think we've talked about that a bit already. So okay, let's move on to the next piece. So let's just cover off low context culture. So low context culture is generally Germanic or Scandinavian cultures, and also men are generally more low context. And what we mean by low context is that the information flow is in a discrete package. So most of the information is in the parcel of information that's passed across. There's nothing there's not a lot of context around it. It's explicit. It's generally very direct communication. And as I mentioned, all of the necessary information is integrated in that exchange. So the exchanges are also more direct. And cultures that are low context are generally easier to enter because you see what you get, right? Or you get what you see. So these cultures typically rely on spoken or written words to communicate meaning. It's to say what you mean what you say type of thing. The cultures prefer explicit formulations, rules, sometimes direct and sometimes frank speech. And it's usually aimed at efficiency, concise use of words, and elaboration of unclear meanings. So these cultures value being articulate and clear, and they also consider detailed writing helpful, often necessary. And we talked about the proofs, the bilateral negotiated to the satisfaction of both sides. And they value documents and contracts as well, again, to be signed as legal and binding for each partner equally. So high context culture is pretty much the opposite. It's generally Latin or Asian cultures, and women are more high context as well. There's a lot more implicit information, and the importance of rank, status, and hierarchy within that group is quite important. It often relies on a common history or background because that aids to this understanding of context, and the communication is often nuanced. You have to read between the lines. It's a bit like that scenario that Ivona was mentioning about the Italian giving the German a bit of feedback, and actually the German completely missed what the subtlety was. Emotions are being transmitted as well. And these cultures are generally difficult to enter if you don't have the context as a key to understand how to enter. So these cultures typically rely more on the non-verbal aspects to communicate meaning, like facial expressions and gestures. They prefer implicit, indirect communication, and usually consider situational factors as more important than what is actually being said, and value relational trust is more important than specified content. So, in other words, words are treated flexibly and contracts are changeable as long as a relationship is in place. And they consider in-group membership and we talk towards building relational closeness. So context for high and low context cultures, it surrounds all interactions. So people in different cultures rely on context to varying degrees to help them understand what others are saying, doing, and meaning. And there's a broad spectrum between those who prefer low context communication and those who prefer high context communication. Now, to make this even more complex, if it wasn't complex enough, an individual can actually have both low context and high context cultures within them. And if you think about a scenario where you are generally a low context person, so you rely heavily on information in that explicit communication. When you are at home with friends at a party, you will often find that there's a lot of unsaid information that doesn't need to be said that is available to you. And so you've automatically switched into a high context culture. So it means that actually it's not just, you know, black and white, it's a series of grey and it's interchangeable. So those things become even more complex. So low context, it's about specific words and descriptions as well as facts, diagrams, and examples that transmit the majority of the message. Whereas for high context, it's suggestions, relationships, shared experiences, and that carries the weight of the message with the words and facts playing a supporting role. So this divide between relying very little and relying heavily on context is going to be one of the more difficult things to navigate when communicating across the cultures within your teams and dealing with questions. So being able to identify the differences between people's innate preferences means that you're going to be better equipped to deal with different approaches to communication. So the high context, low context communication styles determine how we make and manage agreements, negotiations, decisions, which are going to be crucial for any business. And understanding different cultural characteristics and preferences can help team leaders to adjust and plan their approach to different groups. So low context culture teams take the words spoken literally, and they prefer having comprehensive information to prepare for meetings or tasks, and that will be something like precise agendas, information packages, meeting reports, you know, background information. High context culture teams, they don't like or prefer that formalized information, and they feel that sort of approach is too technical or unnecessary, and they prefer face-to-face meetings over documents, as they find relationship building and close contact necessary for establishing mutual understanding. So you've got to adapt the means of communication based on these differences. For high context cultures, people understand messages more through testimonials, personal stories, best practices, and real life examples. And on the contrary, low context audiences, they focus on comprehensive information and data in things like brochures, presentations, or briefs, etc. Now, both styles have their good and bad side when it comes to doing business, and low context can mean more precision, planning, and detail, while high context is good for establishing more personal and solid bonds between business partners. And a clash of these two sides can end up with a lot of misunderstandings and unfinished business. Now, we were going to put that in, but we've taken that last piece out. So you won't see that later necessarily. But if teams are aware of the cultural impacts and they work to gain an understanding of each other's perspectives, they can learn from one another and accomplish good results. And even more than that, they'll benefit from diverse approaches and perspectives to problem solving. So that's a taster of high context, low context cultures. Has anybody got any questions on that before we move on to the next section? Oh, good. Okay. Sorry, somebody was going to say something?
Yeah, just more than an explanation than a question, because the question earlier, Nigel, was about communication within the team. If it was a communication within with a client or someone else, I would go with more written communication than verbal, if that makes sense, because it will involve like proofs that should be in writing, etc.
Absolutely. But again, you need to check for understanding, because depending upon what language you're dealing with, and often it's the business language, international business language is English, you need to understand that they understand what you mean. So while words, what pictures can you think can be, a picture paints 1,000 words. Actually, they can, what you've got in your picture can imply or mean different things in different cultures, depending upon the cultural backgrounds and what those symbols or colors mean in those different backgrounds. So yes, you're right, but you always need to make sure that you are fully understanding the cultural background of the people that you're dealing with, because misunderstandings can easily happen. Right. Okay. So let's move on to what we call spin. Now, this is traditionally a sales technique, and it is a sales technique that is used very successfully to help frame the issues, the real issues and values of two different parties. And it's generally the salesperson eliciting from the client or the prospective client. But these techniques, as you'll see, are actually very useful in terms of understanding and uncovering this potential misunderstanding of information flow between different parties. And spin, although it sounds quite negative, it is literally just an acronym, and that just means acronym, or is it mnemonic? Anyway, whichever. It's a situation, problems, implication, and need. So that's in reverse order. Sorry. So what spin does is it focuses on asking good questions in the right order, and using active listening and translating the prospect's needs into your products or your solutions features. And I say solution because that could mean within a team in terms of the solution to an issue or problem which is causing waste or frustrations or delays within processes between teams or between departments or between different areas within different businesses that are in different countries. So mastering the spin model isn't just read it and do it. It's a straightforward. It's not just a straightforward process where you can just read about it and integrate it. You're going to need to deep dive, understand its ins and outs, and make it a natural part of how you approach sales or solutions within your organization. And you're going to need to practice it. So now, some of these examples are still from the sales arena. But a lot of them I've managed to change so you can understand in a team-oriented context. So situation really is about information gathering. It's about understanding what the status quo is now, what the situation is. And the problems is really identifying the pain points and the problems that is being experienced by carrying out the things as they are now. And the implication is underscoring why those pains need to be solved. And we'll come on to that in a bit more detail, because it's not just about you, the inquisitor, saying, aha, these are your things and da-da-da-da. As you'll find out in a little while, this is all about effectively getting the other party to verbalize what these things are. So effectively, there is a realization, and they're framing it in their own words with their own cultural layers behind it, so that you're actually making sure that they fully understand what the contexts are around these issues. Then the last piece is what's called a need payoff. And that then effectively allows them to understand in their own context, in their own way, why they need to do what they need to do and how it's going to be better. So they need to understand the fact that they've got to make a change, and they know what they need to change. So, and they know what the benefits are going to be. Does that make sense to everyone? Brilliant. Okay. So let's look at situation. So you're going to need to establish a rapport before diving headlong into the details, especially if the team or team members are new to you. And often in business, you find that you are experiencing new relationships with people. It could be that somebody that you knew very well has moved on and a new team leader or manager is in their place, and you need to build that rapport back again. And part of this rapport building needs to include the cultural backgrounds of the individual team members. Now, that could be the head of the team, and it could be the supervisor. It could be everyone within that team that is involved in what you're doing. And you need to ask the questions about the current processes being used. Are they working? What are they dealing with? What pain points do they have? And how are they doing compared to others? And that could also be, if it is you are the head of the team, you need to understand and spend time to understand the individuals. And if they're not doing as well as others, why? If they're struggling, why? Are there issues that can be resolved? Is it a lack of training? Is it a lack of understanding? They weren't ever actually told how to do that job properly. They've just copied somebody that was next to them, or they've had to ask somebody. What are the existing communication methods that are used within the team? Again, we talk about fire and forget messaging, or whether it's much more inclusive and collective in terms of the language and the attention that you're giving to the information that's being sent. So let's look at some example situation questions. So one of them could be, walk me through your average day at your job. What's your approach to whatever it is? Can you tell me about the current processes you use? What are your roles and responsibilities? And those of the wider team. So here, again, this is valuable because within business, we tend to focus on individuals. We don't focus as much, especially when it's performance-related pay. We don't focus as much on team roles and team players. And it's sometimes a lack of understanding about what the whole team is trying to achieve and where they fit into it that means that changes can occur. So do you know and understand your targets? What tools do you currently use? How effective do you find these tools? And how often do you use them? Who's responsible for whatever it is? And what methods of communication do you use with other team members? And you can ask as well, how effective do you find them? What's your top priority for whatever the period is? And do you understand why this is important? So the prior research piece, you need to make sure that the questions that you're asking shouldn't replace your prior research. You need to make sure that you know as much as you can about the individual and team you're liaising with. And why? Because if you're asking questions that you could quite easily have found the answer to outside of that, then you're going to waste their time, and you could annoy them because it just shows that you're not putting in your effort into that process as well. There's nothing wrong with checking for understanding about your understanding of what you think that is happening, but what you're trying to show is that you're committed to it. You're trying to help them. So let's look at some problem questions. So problem questions play a crucial role in highlighting issues your team or colleagues may have. Be they cultural, communication, or understanding related. And they guide the conversation by helping them recognize their problems rather than telling them what those are. So you can guide the conversation to specific issues caused by these diverse backgrounds and how they affect communication and processes. So your situation questions effectively set the scene. They will give you some cues in terms of what you think could be problems. The problem questions are validated by the individual, right? But it's important not to talk about any solutions at this stage. That's going to be reserved for later in the conversation. So let's look at some example problem questions. How important is whatever priority to achieving your task? What challenges do you anticipate? What's your biggest day-to-day challenge? How easy is it to make progress against whatever it is priority? Why does this approach work or not work for you? And does your current approach work to your approach to whatever priority ever fail? And what happens if you're not successful with that priority? So in a perfect world, what would your approach look like? And do you think that problem can be solved? And what's stopping you from solving it? Now, these are actually some really powerful problem questions that are going to help you understand the real issues that are preventing things from happening. And often, it's the people that are actually doing the doing that actually understand what the problems are that are stopping success happen. and they're often not asked what those are. So implications. So not all problems carry the same weight. Initially, your colleagues might only see them as minor inconveniences, and this is where implication questions come in. So they help explore the consequences of your colleagues' problems, e.g. on productivity, morale, overall effectiveness, emphasising any cultural misunderstandings or whatever it is. And by emphasising why these issues need to be addressed, you reinforce the urgency we established earlier. And at this phase, you should still keep the focus on the team members' needs and refrain from bringing up your solution. So let's look at some example implication questions. Has a KPI ever been missed due to your current approach, and why? How much does your current approach cost? Now, they might not know that, they may. How much time does your current approach utilise? How would you distribute these resources differently if you didn't have to use them on whatever? What goal would you like to achieve that you currently can't because of whatever problem? And how is that problem impacting your work? How is it impacting your team's work? And how is that problem impacting your customer's experience? And would solving that problem allow you to advance your career? So let's look at need payoff. So need payoff questions rely on how well the earlier questions showed how your solution can solve your colleagues' problems. Instead of just telling them how your solution helped, these questions lead your team to help them see the benefits themselves. So if you ask the right questions beforehand, the next thing you should do is to ensure they opt for your solution. But instead of being direct, ask questions that show them the value of choosing the solution you're proposing to guide them in making a decision. For example, how addressing these problems will enhance communication, collaboration, and efficiency, for example, and targets, which then lead to performance-related pay or whatever. So this is particularly important where businesses have international offices or teams working across different time zones and cultures. So let's look at some example need payoff questions. What would change if you did whatever approach differently? How would communication be made easier if you adopted whatever approach? And you could go even further and say, and if you could improve communication, what would that mean to the bottom line? How would it be easier to achieve whatever priority with whatever solution? And would your team get value from the solution that you're talking about? And how do you think solving the problem would help you? And would achieving that ever priority, what would it do for your business? You know, in cash terms or profitability or, you know, percentage performance or market share or whatever. So this is where you will grow collectively, because I think we're going to ask you to split into potentially 2 to 3 groups. And one of you is going to be a team member and the other one's going to be a line manager. And you'll be given something in the chat, you'll direct to you, you'll be elected to be in the team line manager or the team member, and you'll get a little brief. And I think we're going to give, I can't remember how much, is it 5 minutes, 10 minutes, for you to have and try to use the spin techniques to the situation, problems, implication and need to uncover the real issues behind what you see as the line manager or you know, well, I think it would be the line manager, is the real issues that are underlying the whatever performance is there. Does that make sense? So line manager needs to use questions to build rapport, uncover the current situation issues, get the team member to verbalise the implications and achieve the commitment to the next stage. Okay, here we go. Okay, so what we're going to aim to cover here is what are high context and low context cultures. I know Ivona talked about that very briefly, but we'll go and deep dive into it a little bit more to give you some understanding of the differences in understanding that can occur in business, and also why it's important to understand and consider these in your communication approaches. And also why you need to consider different communication approaches depending upon the culture makeup of your team, and that could be gender, it could be ethnic background, it could be anything. And we'll cover off some examples of high versus low context issues affecting your team in the real world. Okay, things to actively consider when communicating across different culture types as well. So B, remain open to different styles, learn their values and their behaviour. And as we were talking about, I think Chris and Ivana specifically, was check for understanding. And actually, it's not just say, do you understand? And there's a nod. You know, the techniques that we'll go on to a little bit later will actually help a communication, a conversation that elicits much more deeper checkpoints in terms of the understanding about an issue or a problem. Okay, so just a quick poll out to you, the audience. It is really about communication techniques. So how do you normally communicate with your teams? So if you can unmute yourselves and just tell me, you know, in briefly, if you have to impart some information or ask for information from your teams or from colleagues, how do you go about doing it? Anyone?
I'll start. Okay, I'll go ahead. Normally, for our team, for example, we rely a lot in our chat boxes or teams, let's say. Either we communicate privately using chat privately. However, I always encourage going for a phone call, like we are doing now. Just call on Teams and discuss it verbally.
And basically, what this is going to do is help you practice spin, because it is a challenging technique, and it's nice to be able to do it in a safe way, you know. So let's give it a go and see how you get on. I'm not expecting wow, right, but it's just to give you an experience of what you need to do it for the mindset to try and understand things. Okay, so in essence, the line manager has a particular view of the team member. Okay, now the team member has obviously got a different perspective, and what you're going to need to do is to try and understand from the brief that you're given as the line manager what the real issues could be. So you need to ask situation questions. Now you're going to need to have a little bit of a freelancing on this, but ultimately, you know, you're going to need to ask your spin questions to then get to the bottom of what the real issues are. Okay, so how did you all find it? Give me some feedback.
So for me, it was quite, you know, it was quite difficult because I have all the spin, situation, you know, implication, need, payoff. But what would be useful is to have like a list of questions for each point, and then that would help, I think, a lot in asking the right questions.
Okay. Sarah, you were going to say something?
Yeah, it was good. I'd actually wrote a few of the questions down as we were going through the slides, just to because that's how I work. But yeah, I think just needed that little bit more time to start digging in a bit deeper into the questions and how you could find resolutions using the spin method.
And Joe, what did you think?
Hi. I think I felt myself just diving in and giving some of the issues that were on the role play scenario. I think maybe in real life I would have been a bit cagier about bringing those things in, you know,
you would be, you absolutely would be. Yeah, absolutely. Which talks to this, the importance of. I know we didn't have enough time, but it was just to give you a sense or a flavour of it, and to put yourself in the different situations You know, some of you might be managers and you were put into a team member role, but it just gives you a flavor of why you need to take your time and why you need to spend the effort to actually uncover all of the, or as many of the issues as you can. Doesn't always have to be in one go. You can take a number of different bites at it, but ultimately, what you're seeing there is that, you know, some of the frustrations that you would get. So Michelle, what did you think?
I think it's much more difficult when you put it into practice, because you really have to figure out the right questions to ask to get the answers that you're looking for. And like Joe said, she was the team member in my scenario. I was the manager. She kind of just started telling me the issues, but of course, in a real life situation, that may not have been the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's definitely something that takes practice.
Exactly. Chris.
Yeah, it was a really interesting exercise. I think, you know, initially at the beginning I was thinking, right, just trying to think of all the different spin questions in my head. But then when we started to sort of get into the swing of things, and reading about sort of the line manager I was, and one of the things was like, I don't like face-to-face communication because I don't have time for it. That was quite tough going, you know, trying to put myself in that situation, but then hearing the other side going, there's too many different communication methods and actually sometimes it's really unclear. That makes me go, well, already, okay, I can start to see, and I felt it's like trying to break down those barriers and those initial kind of views in terms of going, well, they're just not doing it, they're just not doing what I'm asking them to do.
Yeah.
And really just trying to say, you know, obviously, you know, the implications if these things don't improve is that, you know, performance is going to get even worse. But knowing, okay, actually the communication isn't okay, and actually, can I make the time to do a face-to-face meeting with people to make it really clear as to what I need and to ask questions? You know, how can I best accommodate that to try and then, you know, you start to then collaborate a bit more. But yeah, and I think it's kind of, you know, I think it does require a bit of going, you know, you need to take down those defenses and kind of going, well, they're just not working, to actually, well, hang on, what's going on behind the scenes? What am I not seeing?
Exactly. I've just asked Lelda to allow me to share my screen. I'll show you what the total brief pack was in a minute. But Eamon, what did you think?
Starting from where Chris stopped, yeah, finding myself and not being able to provide a face-to-face meeting, etc. Just remind me of a school when the teacher is given a topic and I need to stick into that topic, although that's not me, because in a real life scenario, I'll find, I mean, maybe that's the best solution to solve this problem is to have a face-to-face meeting and ask all the questions. Having said that, yeah, I was in my mind, I was going to prepare the questions, but in the most polite way, not to offend the employee, you know. Starting from where Chris stopped, yeah, finding myself and not being able to provide a face-to-face.
The spin techniques excels in getting a deep understanding and rapport building. And these elements are vital in internal communications across different cultural backgrounds within a global team. And as you can see, the responses are framed in that individual's cultural thought processes. So you're effectively making sure that they understand what the issues are. So understanding your colleagues involves recognizing their cultural context. And this recognition extends to comprehending whether they come from a high context or low context culture. So high context cultures rely heavily on the implicit side of things and hierarchy, and the low context cultures prefer explicit direct communication. So identifying the cultural context of those people you're interacting with can significantly enhance how messages are conveyed and received, and thus fostering stronger and more effective relationships. And it's important to continually assess and adapt these cultural nuances to ensure that communication is not just heard, but understood and respected across all the levels of our diverse team. Okay, questions?
Thank you very much. Yes, really great stuff. Language is a powerful tool, and this is something I'm going to cover in those last a few minutes that we have. So absolutely, language is a powerful tool, and it's that attention to the client's choice of words, the tone, the body language, and how we read between the lines. Language can help us shift attitudes and behaviors, and language has the ability to build relationships and connections, but also the selection of words, the language we use can make others feel excluded or even less important. And this is where we bring inclusive language. An inclusive language is the words and phrases that we use that avoid bias, slang, or expressions that discriminate against a group of people based on their race, gender, socioeconomic status, or ability. And of course, inclusive language is essential for creating that environment where all our colleagues, clients, suppliers feel respected and valued. Again, everyone has different individual personal preferences about the language. However, it's important to be aware that if we don't intentionally include, we unintentionally exclude. So just a couple of examples. The trends, especially in professional communication, has shifted in general terms towards more inclusive and less formal styles. So for example, starting an email with just "dear sirs" is not inclusive. Why? Well, because it specifically addresses only male recipients. So using language such as "dear colleagues," "dear team members," or "hello" ensures that all the recipients, regardless of their gender identity, feel acknowledged and respected. So starting point, replace gender-specific terms like businessman with business person. Say parents instead of assuming specifically that there is a family structure with mother and father. Use partner instead of assuming husband or wife. So let's just look at some more examples of inclusive language in practice. So the first example, can your husband explain the details to you later? Now, inclusive version would be, would you like me to go over the details with you to ensure everything is clear? Right? So what is the problem with the first sentence? What is the problem with the first statement? Well, this is the non-inclusive question, assumes that person has a husband and that the husband is the one who should understand the details. Okay, another example, non-inclusive language. Is the bank account under your father's name? And inclusive version would be, whose name is the account under? Which really avoids the assumptions about a family structure and roles. So what is a deeper problem with that first statement? Well, asking if account is under a father's name directly assumes a specific family structure, but also it might be irrelevant because that individual who don't have a father or don't have financial ties with their father might be present. So a few more examples. Non-inclusive language. This type of job is very popular with people from your country. Shall we proceed with this? So what would be inclusive version of this question? Well, we have a variety of available positions based on your needs. We can explore which option might suit you best. So again, what was the problem with the first version? Well, the non-inclusive statement assume preferences based on nationality, which can be stereotyping. So inclusive phrase focuses more on that individual personal needs rather than assumptions based on where they came from. And a final example. Do you understand what is required, or should I simplify it for you? So what would be an inclusive version? Can anyone want to guess? how can we reframe, reword this statement to make it inclusive?
You could just say, is there anything you would like me to go over or clarify for you?
Absolutely, absolutely that, yes. So there are a few options, like asking a question whether actually that person require more information, or if we don't want to assume, or if, depending on the cultural context, we just want to say, well, let me provide you with more details or a different explanation about what is required. Because again, what was the problem with that first statement? Well, the first question might come off as implying that the person might not understand without a simpler explanation. So just to summarize, using inclusive language can not only prevent discomfort or offense, but also can help us enhance that relationship and trust. And of course, language is also always evolving and changing. Thank you very much. Yes, really great stuff. Language is a powerful tool, and this is something I'm going to cover in those last a few minutes that we have. So absolutely, language is a powerful tool, and it's that attention to the client's choice of words, the tone, the body language, and how we read between the lines. Language can help us shift attitudes and behaviors, and language has the ability to build relationships and connections, but this means there are no definite rules. But of course, understanding some key principles will help you adapt a more inclusive approach on a day-to-day basis, paying attention to the choice of words. Right, so now moving to our summary. And here are just some key pieces of advice I would like to share with you briefly. So first and foremost, navigating cross-cultural interactions requires sensitivity, awareness, and some practical strategies. The starting point is to define our goal, what we want to achieve. So set some clear, specific goal for what you want to communicate, what you want your communication to accomplish. Is this to inform? Is this to persuade? Maybe entertain, or combination of all of those. Get present. Take a moment to clear your mind and focus fully on the communication ahead, and be patient as well. Cultural understanding takes time. So be patient with yourself and others as you navigate those complexities, and be flexible as well. Make adjustments if needed, as needed, and if those adjustments will be reasonable. Of course, appreciate the kind of person you are talking to. So understand their backgrounds, their demographics. This includes their profession, their cultural backgrounds, and any other relevant factors that might influence the way how they perceive your message. And observe the language, the tone, the style. This again really helps us to respond, craft messages in a way that resonates and it's easy to understand by your speaker, by your colleague, by the audience. Listen actively. Listen what's being said, not just hearing the words, but actually understanding what's been said or what is not being said. So those non-verbal messages are very important, and especially when we are communicating, in some cases online, those facial expressions, hand gestures can convey some meaning in different cultures. So it's important to pay attention. And feedback. So reflect back on what you understood from the speaker to check for understanding. Speaker fine-tune. Allow the speaker, allow your colleague to clarify based on the feedback that you received. And summarize the main points, agree to follow-up actions, avoiding assumptions. So do not make any assumptions based on your own cultural norms or stereotypes and your past experiences. Individual behavior can vary widely. As we just described, it depends on so many factors, even within a single culture. So don't assume. and be respectful, because respect can help build us that trust, that open lines of communication. So now, as we draw to a close, I would like to invite you to complete a short survey, which will help us to improve and hear your feedback. And if there are any questions, I'm very much conscious of the time. So if there are any questions, please feel free to share them either in the chat box or by email to Lelda. Avoiding assumptions. So do not make any assumptions based on. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining. Thank you for participation. We will be in contact again with further courses. We will share the slides with you. We will share the role play scenarios as well. And I wanted to just show you some additional resources and free resources, our free multilingual resources, some latest news and insights on cross-cultural communications in our newsletters, and of course, a few more courses to explore. So thank you very much for now.
Great, thank you.
So much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Great, thank you.